And then we see Joe at a pond, a cold pond in the Arctic, getting set to go into the water, talking about bathing. I've talked to Joe about this episode, and I know that it wasn't just about taking a bath out there, because sure, it's awesome to get yourself into wild water and to stay clean and give a mind to hygiene, but going in really, really cold water when you don't have a lot of calories available, it drops your body temperature, and it takes a ton of calories to get your body temperature back up. You're burning through a lot of reserves. Joe wasn't actually going in that water just to bathe. He was doing it because there were edible roots in that pond. And as he's talking about how cold it is and how weird it feels, he's digging around in the muck with his toes to dig up some of those roots without having to get his whole head down underwater. So he is finding edible plant foods in an environment where it is already almost winter and there are very few plant foods around. So actually a very wise survival choice, not just gratuitously taking a bath in the water. And you know that they're going to show someone getting naked early on in this show because that's good television and that's good drama. So he got to be the one who they put in there getting into that pond, taking his clothes off first. So yeah, his little notch in his belt there. You can also see some raspberries as you're looking at the landscape around him, but they're on their way out. But this is amazing to have raspberries. If you have raspberries or blueberries on your site, those are actually sweet, delicious berries with a lot of calories in them. Huge score. A lot of what there are in that area are not sweet and delicious berries. There's high bush cranberries, there's low bush cranberries, also known as lingonberries, there's crowberries, there's rose hips, all of which are food sources, none of which are sweet and delicious. So the calories in something that is sweet, that's a lot of carbohydrates versus very minimal calories in a lot of the other berries. So I'm always looking at the vegetation in people's sites because it is not even. I had 0 raspberries, almost no blueberries, mostly just cranberries and crowberries. Good for fiber, good for nutrients, very low in calories. So this is a huge thing for these participants if they have good plant resources. So then we have Joe as well seeing a bear on his site. So again, oh my gosh, so much wildlife there. And Joe was the only one on the season not to have a bow with him. So my season, I saw bear sign of bears that had been there before I got to my site, but then 0 sign of bear or big game of any kind on my site the entire season. And here already people are seeing them in the first couple days. I was crossing my fingers and hoping and praying to see a bear because bear are one of the best sources of fat in that environment. Bear are very, very fatty, and I've rendered a lot of bear fat and eaten a lot of bear cracklings in my life, and it is amazing and delicious. And I was just dreaming about bear encounters like these folks were having. Joe not having a bow means that a bear is a liability, not a benefit to him. So here's what I was talking about in terms of feeling like a participant in the landscape rather than, feeling separate from it. When you're separate from the landscape, then you might see bear as a threat, right? And be worried about bear coming and taking your food. If you're a participant in the landscape, then you're a predator like a bear, and you're going to be fighting for your territory. So Joe, not having a bow, not having that bear be a possible food source, he wants to let that bear know that this is his territory, and so he chooses to go after the bear. And his work is also something that involves parks and areas that bears are problematic. So he's used to going after bear to condition them that humans are dangerous. So that is the choice that he makes when he's there on the landscape, and very, very wise. Without a weapon, that is the smartest thing you can do, is dissuade them from early on and have them know that you are a threat too, buddy. Then we go to Kai, and we see her talking about her morning. And this is something that as the audience you don't necessarily know, that every single morning you are out there as a participant, you are talking to the camera as the first thing in your day. You're doing a morning check-in, talking about what your plans are for the day, what the day is looking like, and then in the evening doing the same thing, talking about how your day went. So we get to see Kai doing her morning check-in, talking about her day and her plans for it. And it's a beautiful little window into the alone experience to see someone still groggy out of bed, kind of visioning their day. So much of your time out there is dreaming and planning and focusing on food and shelter and firewood. So she's starting off by working on her shelter, and then we get to see an amazing, brilliant thing that Kai did, which she made her own gaiters. And she takes apart those gaiters and she puts them together so that they can be the door of her cabin. So Kai and I are both people who make a lot of our own wilderness gear, and here is where you see the huge benefit of making your own things and the ingenuity that you can use, because you can repurpose those things or you can make them so that they are easy to use for other things. So with my buckskin clothing, I was constantly cutting pieces off to use for cordage, making repairs, doing things like that. Kai probably made those gaiters with a mind to being able to use them for other things, versus store-bought gaiters. They are made for one purpose and one purpose alone, and you could never make a beautiful front door with store-bought gaiters. So good on Kai for having the forethought and the skills to do that. Super awesome. And Kai, again, is out there talking about what it is to have a wilderness experience like this as a woman, and inspiring other women by being out there and showing what we're capable of and what they too are capable of. So I just really appreciate Kai, and knowing that we're on the same team in terms of really wanting to represent women well and inspire women and let them know that the woods are just as available to them as they are to men, and it's just a matter of getting out there and believing in yourself. So loved to see that, and loved Kai's beautiful shelter. She talks about how important it is to make it airtight. She's using logs, she's chinking with sphagnum moss, just as I did for my shelter. Those Arctic winds are so intense, and having still air that you can warm up with your fire inside is huge. Much better than boughs that let the air go right through. So sweet plans on the shelter there. And then we see Joe waking up with the Toys R Us song in his head. And, you know, I really resonated with Joe talking about how he could not get this song out of his head, because there is a phenomenon that happens when you are out in the wilderness by yourself for a long time. And what I found is some switch clicked in my head, and all of the crap that I had taken in, jingles from random commercials, bad pop music, movies that I had had on VHS tapes that I watched a lot in my childhood, all of a sudden that stuff just comes spewing out of your brain, and I would just have a constant soundtrack of things that I did not particularly want to be hearing playing in my brain all the time. You have this idea that when you're out in the woods, it's going to be pristine and beautiful and amazing, and you're just going to be one with the wild right away, but we still carry all of this weird stuff out there with us, and it is still in our brain, and it comes out, and we saw that happening with Joe in that moment. Then he gets his first rabbit in his snares, and you can just really hear and feel the excitement and the gratitude and the joy and the amazement of that moment. And, you know, no one who hasn't gone a long time without food and has no idea where their next meal is coming from can really understand how significant it is to get your first game when you have been hungry for a long time. But I love that clip of Joe and just how visceral that is in his voice, in his demeanor, and how incredibly grateful and amazed he is by that experience. And I know that, you know, Joe didn't have a lot of snaring experience going in. I didn't have a lot of snaring experience going in. And that moment when you realize that this is happening and you actually can do this is so amazing. So Sean is definitely hamming it up for the camera a lot. You can tell that he is someone who is used to being in front of a camera and kind of has a lot of shtick and demeanor, and some of it is him hamming it up, and then some is kind of the things that they just include. Yeah, really funny watching Sean just be silly on camera and working out how to be silly. And I found that, yeah, the first couple weeks are often about finding your comfort with the camera, and then that kind of sense of being on film goes away, because you can only carry that sense so long when you're starving in the wilderness. But Sean is building a very significant shelter. That is like a serious log cabin that man has going there. And I'm sure that he's planning to chink it and make those walls solid like Kai was doing. But I'm always thinking about the amount of calories that it takes to build a really large shelter, to heft around really big material rather than small material. And then how much calories in terms of firewood it takes to heat shelters of that size. So I think we have this idea, because we're Americans, right, that bigger is better, and you want a significant place and you want a big place to spend the winter, because that's a long time of being indoors. But an environment as cold as the Arctic, every extra cubic foot in that space is something that you are going to have to be heating, either with your body heat or with your fire. And every bit of heat that is coming into your shelter is firewood you have to gather. So I really feel like smaller shelters, big enough to be adequate to move around, to do all the things you need to do, and no bigger, is really where it's at in really cold environments, and ones that are less calories to build. Easy for me to say, right? I peeled all of the poles in my double-walled shelter. I put a huge amount of time and energy into my shelter, but also, thinking about the size of materials that you're hefting is an important consideration out there. Then we see Sean find the biggest piece of trash that anyone has found on any alone season. Oh my gosh, he found a boat in the woods, a boat covered in wood, looked like maybe it had been stashed there. Now, a lot of folks are saying, why didn't he take that out on the water? This was not an intact boat, right? If he had found an actual functional boat, the production team would have taken it away from him. You're not allowed to have something that would give you such a huge advantage over the other folks in a competition like this. So you're supposed to report all trash that you find, and then they decide whether or not you can keep it. Most things that are small, you're able to keep them, but big finds like a boat, no way. So Sean does what many people might think to do, which is use it as a container. And in this case, he uses it as a hot tub. So again, tons of calories, tons of energy to make that into a tub and take a soak. But I totally get how, when you're out there in such an extreme environment, having a little luxury, having a pleasure, having something that feels like play and is really fun to do is a huge boost to your mental attitude out there. And mental attitude is everything. So we get to see Sean turn this boat into a hot tub and take a soak. And right after, we see him go through a really difficult tragedy, right? Which is, okay, everyone, spoiler alert, I am going to talk about one of the outcomes from this episode. So if you haven't seen it, you might not want to watch this part. He goes to light a fire, and he cannot find his ferro rod. And I know that feeling. There was one moment when I set down my Leatherman next to a snare I was setting, and then went on to the next one, and then went to find that Leatherman on my belt, and it wasn't there. Luckily, I knew exactly where it was. Walked back, it was right at my last snare. But wow, when you are out there, your tools are everything. Only 10 items, so every single item is key to your life. And probably no item is as key to your life as your ability to make fire in a very, very cold environment. Being able to make fire quickly, efficiently, every time with a minimum of calories is huge. So for him to have lost his ferro rod, that is a really big deal. I was so careful with my tools out there. I had my ferro rod always on my belt next to my Leatherman. I was checking it a million times a day, never fell off, but I always put my hand there anytime I was switching activities, because they are everything. So having your gear actually attached to you as opposed to in a bag or in a pocket or something is huge, and we really see that with Sean, and my heart just goes out to him in this episode. And we see him go and look for it and then fall immediately into despair without having it. And here's one of those times when we really see what a difference editing can make, because they make it look like that happened in a short amount of time. And of course they do, right? The episodes are an hour and cover days and days, so they have to. But I know that Sean spent days looking for that ferro rod. It wasn't just a quick cursory search. It was a long time looking for it and not finding it, and realizing that without it, just wasn't going to happen for him, wasn't going to work to stay out there. So very emotional moment. And I know that the emotions that we see on Sean isn't from just a couple of hours, but from a long time, real deep assessment of what it would be to be out there without that. And, I support him for the choice that he made. I can't imagine what it would be to be out there without fire. And yes, friction fire is possible. And it's a skill, and he says that he's not, it's not one of his strong suits, and it's a very hard environment to find the materials for friction fire. On my season, one person, Nathan Donnelly, went out without a ferro rod, and he struggled and struggled and struggled to make friction fire, even though he's very experienced at making friction fire. Here, come up on my lap so people can see it's you I'm petting and not that I'm rubbing my ankles. And he really struggled with it until he found a piece of cedar that had washed up that is not native to that area and was able to make friction fire with that. So Sean had seen that season. He knew how hard it was for Nathan, who has a lot of experience. So it seems like he probably made the right call given that situation. But still, sorry to see him go, and it would be heartbreaking. So we see them come and pull Sean and put him in the boat, and it's really sad to see him go, and it made me really happy because the guys standing there interviewing him as he's talking about going are Dave Holder and Dan Bree, who were on my season as well and were the people who would come out and do medical checks and weight checks for me. And so seeing them I love them both. And when you have almost no human contact, those little teeny bits of human contact in the medical checks mean so much. So lovely to see them, and Dave Holder has become a dear friend of mine, and I love it when we get to see his face on the episode. So sad for Sean, thrilled to see Dave and Dan. So, wow, big first episode, so much to talk about, and then, oh my gosh, you guys, I'm so happy for them, and I am so jealous for myself. They got to talk about their episode with the audience and share their own experience. Now, granted, it's a little forced, it's a little weird. I'm not sure why Colby is in that garage when it feels like it's kind of a studio situation. It's a little bit weird, and I'm sure they edit out, a lot of the things the folks actually have to say. But the opportunity to actually get asked questions and respond and talk about your time out once you've come out is huge. I didn't have that. That's part of why I did all of the videos about my season, but it's not interactive. They got to interact with each other and with Colby. So an amazing addition to the show. Super jealous. Not sure that it has the depth of the conversation that I would want. I would rather have, a longer and less edited version where they get to talk about what they want to rather than get asked questions. But still, Tales from the Arctic, interesting twist for Alone season 7. And, I just want to talk briefly about a couple of the things they talk about on there. One is that, Alone is seen as kind of the pinnacle of these shows. I think Roland mentions that. And again, that's like I talked about, just the fact that it is so real when you are out there with your own filming, no camera crew, no food, not interacting with anything but this vast wilderness. And so, yeah, Alone is really absolutely amazing in a class by it. Also, the degree to which most people in our culture just really don't understand true hunger. And it's so easy to think that you get it when, you fasted for a day or something, but being out, or, even long-term fasting. Even long-term fasting, when you are choosing it in an environment where you have control over the other factors, is really different than when you are in the wilderness, completely dependent on yourself, no idea when or if food is coming, and expending a huge amount of calories operating in a cold environment where you don't have access to warmth, an environment that is incredibly grueling and takes a ton of stamina and calories just to get out and do what you need to do. Doing all that with no food, it is a profound experience that most viewers will never understand. And that is kind of the biggest overarching thing in my commentary from Alone is until you've really experienced it, there's no way to get in your body, in your mind, what it is to be in that extreme an environment with so little resources. They also showed some never before seen footage in these clips, which I think is hilarious because all of it is never before seen footage, right? It's the first episode and everything is new every episode. So the footage in the after talk isn't any more never before seen than the footage in the episode itself, but it sells, so there you have it. But so our never before seen footage with Sean is him finding so much amazing trash. He found a rifle out there. He found all kinds of tin cans. He found a shovel. Oh my gosh. Those are amazing resources, and I will say that the fact that he found so much of that kind of thing in that area shows that that is an area that is commonly used by people, which means that it is an area that probably has a lot more resources than some of the other spots. You see some people who aren't finding any trash. In my location, I did not find any trash besides a few cans that had drifted to shore. That means that those are areas that people aren't going to very much, probably because there's not much game and there's not much fishing. Unfortunately, Sean didn't get to stay long enough to really explore, but I would say Sean probably had a bomber spot based on the fact that clearly a lot of people have been going to that spot, going there to hunt because he found a rifle, going there to fish because he found a boat, going there to live potentially because he found a shovel. So, wow, would love to see what Sean's site was like. Maybe I will one day. So, wow. Season 7 of Alone, $1 Million Challenge in the Arctic, in the same region that my season 6 was. And yeah, super happy to get to talk about it with you guys and share a little bit more perspective from someone who has been on the ground experiencing similar things. Big takeaways are, holy crap, so much game on this season. Almost everyone getting food right off the bat. Lots of people having encounters with bears, wolverines, just whoa. Very, very different than my experience and a lot of the time on my season. And yeah, just amazing to see folks out in that environment and get to experience it all again through them. So thanks for watching, everyone. Happy to take your feedback, things that you'd like to hear me talk about in these discussions. Know that I am not going to be tearing into anyone, so don't ask me for specific critiques because that is not the spirit of these. But yeah, look forward to more talking about all of this stuff as we go on through the season. Check out my website, subscribe to my channel. Please take a look at my Patreon membership where you get more exclusive content and you're really supporting me in what I do. Most of my funding for these videos comes from Patreon, so it's a huge help in my ability to make more of these, to have more Patreon membership. And lots on my classes and things I have available at www.buckskinrevolution.com.